The salamander commander was super scary and powerful. Sakuya whispered to Lifa, "This is bad." Lifa looked at her confused. "Huh?" Sakuya explained. "I've seen that salamander's huge two-handed sword online. It's called the Demon Blade Graham. That means he must be General Eugene." Lifa held her breath and said, "I've heard of him." Sakuya kept talking. "He's the younger brother of Lord Mortimer, the leader of the salamanders. And get this, they're actually brothers in real life. Eugene's brother is super smart, but Eugene is a powerhouse. When it comes to fighting, people think Eugene is the best. He's the strongest salamander out there, which makes him a top contender for being the strongest player in the game. This is getting serious." Lifa got really excited and clenched her hands together, saying, "Oh, Kirito." Meanwhile, two fighters were facing off in midair. They stared each other down for a long time, like they were trying to figure out who was stronger. The tension between them was palpable, as they glared at each other waiting to see what would happen next. The clouds hung low over the plateau. But every now and then they would part to let beams of sunlight shine through. One of these sunbeams landed on a salamander's sword, making it sparkle. Suddenly Eugene darted into action. He took off in a super-fast sprint, creating a whirlwind around himself as he moved. His huge sword swung down in a wide red arc, aiming straight for a tiny Spriggan. But Kirito was just as quick to react. Kirito raised his sword high above his head, and stretched out his wings, ready to strike. Lifa could tell what he was planning. He would block the enemy's sword, and then quickly counterattack. But just as the red sword came crashing down on Kirito, something weird happened. The moment it clashed with Kirito's black sword, everything got blurry and hard to see. The sword slice flew right through Kirito's blade and turned solid again. Then, a massive explosion rocked the world. Dagon! The blast was so strong that it knocked Kirito to the ground with a huge flash of light. He landed hard like a leaf blown away by a powerful storm. Another loud boom shook the air, sending up a cloud of dirt. Lifa's eyes were wide with shock, as she stumbled out a question. "What was that?" Alicia Rue knew exactly what was going on. "Demon Blade Graham has a special power called Ethereal Shift," she said. "It can pass right through any sword or shield that tries to block it." She sounded amazed. Alicia leaned in, trying to get a closer look at Kirito's health bar. But before she could even focus, a dark figure burst out of the cloud of dirt like a speeding arrow. A massive object came crashing straight for Eugene, who was hovering in midair. "Ha! You lived through that hit," the salamander exclaimed, clearly thrilled. Kirito shot back. "What was that thing?" and charged at Eugene with his sword. The sound of clashing metal filled the air. Clang. Eugene wasn't just lucky to have an awesome weapon. He also knew how to use it. He swung his big bulky sword to block every single one of Kirito's attacks. Even Lifa had never been able to keep up with Kirito's moves. But Eugene was doing just fine. Just when it seemed like the fight was slowing down, it started all over again. Then, Kirito's powerful sword, Demon Blade Graham, flashed its sharp edge. Kirito quickly raised his sword to block the attack, but it was too fast. The blade struck him hard in the stomach, and he let out a loud gana. It felt like all the air had been knocked out of him. He spun around and flew into the air, finally stopping himself by flapping his wings really hard. Kirito groaned, "That stings. Hasn't it been 30 seconds already?" Eugene grinned, feeling super confident. "Sorry, now I want to defeat you," he said. "And I won't stop until I've won and made you my prize." Kirito shot back. "This is going to be good. I'm looking forward to seeing the sadness in your eyes when you lose." Kirito lifted his huge sword again. But it seemed like the fight was already over. The problem was that Eugene's sword, Graham, had a special power that made it really hard to defend against. Kirito couldn't just block the attack. He had to dodge it completely if he wanted to stay safe. The battle was intense, with lightning-fast blows flying back and forth. It seemed almost impossible to keep up. Sakuya had the same thought. "This is going to be tough," she said. "Both players are really good, but their weapons aren't equal. The only thing that could beat a powerful demon blade like that would be a legendary sword called the Holy Blade Excalibur." She paused, thinking about how unlikely it was to find such a rare weapon. But where can we even find something like that? She wondered. If anyone could pull off this challenge, it was Kirito. Lifa couldn't believe her eyes. This guy had only been playing the game for a day, but he was already beating crazy odds like it was nothing. She clutched her hands to her chest. Amazed, Eugene suddenly darted forward, his wings glowing bright red. Kirito swung his sword in a wild arc and barely dodged out of the way, just in time. The two fairies zoomed through the air, weaving in and out of each other in crazy patterns. They crashed into each other, exploding in bursts of colorful lights and effects, only to fly apart again and keep fighting. Kirito was in trouble. His health was running low after taking 2 big hits. Just a little while back he had blocked a powerful magic attack with ease. But Eugene's attacks were different. He had gotten past Kirito's strong defense like it was nothing, which made him a really tough opponent. Suddenly Kirito spun around and held out his right hand. Something weird was happening. Kirito's hand turned black and started flashing, boom, boom. Suddenly clouds of smoke burst out around them. The dark clouds spread out, covering a huge area. They floated above everyone's heads, making everything go dark. Leafa squinted, trying to see Kirito. But it was getting harder and harder to see. "Leafa, I need this for a moment," a voice whispered in her ear. She let out a surprised yelp. "What?" Leafa's heart skipped a beat as she felt her favorite sword, a katana, being pulled out of its scabbard. "Kirito," she called out, spinning around. But there was no one in sight. She glanced down to see that her scabbard was empty. Suddenly a voice shouted out from the thick smoke. "Is this your idea of buying time?" It was Eugene. His words were followed by the sound of him casting a spell. A burst of red light shot out through the dark smoke, lighting up everything around her. The weird fog started to clear, and sunlight poured back in. Leafa quickly looked up at the sky, but something was off. He was nowhere to be found. The only creature floating in the air was a salamander general. No matter where Leafa looked, she couldn't spot the quick little Spriggan. A Kate Sith whispered behind her. "You don't think he just ran away to save himself?" Leafa spun around, her words bursting out before she could even finish the sentence. "He wouldn't." She knew him too well. Most players would run for their lives in a situation like this, but not Kirito. He wasn't just playing this virtual reality game, he was living it. To him, this online world was just as real as the one outside his door. He believed that the friendships, promises and love that grew here were true and meant something. Can you hear it? A beautiful sound filled the air like a flute playing a happy tune. It got louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Leafa's eyes welled up with tears as she finally saw what was making the noise. The figure was standing in the sunlight, which was so bright it was hard to look at. A small shadow came down from above, moving quickly through the sun's rays. Eugene looked up too, but the sunlight was so strong that he had to squint and raise his hand to block it. Most players would have tried to dodge to the side to avoid the sun's intense heat. But Eugene was different. His face scrunched up in a grimace, and then his mouth opened super wide. "Da-da-das," he yelled at the top of his lungs. The ground shook beneath his feet as he unleashed the salamander's powerful charge attack, right into the blazing sun. Kirito's body blasted upward like a rocket, with a bright red light streaming behind him. As he dove down from above, he made a weird move. He switched his giant sword to just one hand. His right hand, his left hand was hidden behind his back. Then, in a flash, he held it up high. The sunlight sparkled on something shiny in his hand, and Leafa's eyes widened as she realized what it was. She couldn't miss the silver gleam. It was unmistakable. Kirito was holding the katana. He had just pulled out of its holder. What made this really cool was that he was using 2 swords at once, one in each hand. Using 2 blades like this wasn't a new idea, but it was super tricky to do well. Lots of players had tried it before, but Leafa didn't know of anyone who had actually made it work. Imagine trying to fight with 2 swords at the same time. It's really tough to use them both precisely, which is what you need to do to win. In real kendo matches, using 2 shinai, one big and one small, wasn't against the rules. But in official school competitions, like those in middle and high school, it was not allowed. Even in college and beyond, hardly anyone used 2 shinai, because it's just too tricky. Fighting with 2 swords was a tough way to score a hit. It was just as tricky in this virtual world, where every move counted. Eugene sneered at Kirito's choice of weapons. He thought it was a crazy last resort. But Leafa had faith, her big brown eyes shining with tears. She believed in Kirito all the way. Just then the salamander's massive sword swung up into the air with a loud roar. The Spriggan swung his shiny silver katana down to attack. The red and black blades started shaking really fast. It was like the sword had a mind of its own, and it zoomed straight for Kirito's neck, with a loud guying. But just in time, Kirito raised his huge sword in his right hand and blocked the attack with a sharp crash. The tip of the brigand's sword bounced back, stopping just inches from Kirito's face. It was a really close call. The timing was perfect, like threading a needle just right. Eugene's eyes went wide with shock and Kirito let out a loud battle cry. Yusha. Uptias. His swords flashed forward so fast. They were just a blur. The katana sliced through the air smoothly, while the great sword thrust forward in perfect sync. They moved like pistons, back and forth, striking again and again. Kirito pulled back, then struck once more, his katana flying forward from the lower left in a lightning-fast move. The great sword came crashing down, following the same path as before. Silver and black colors blurred together in a flurry of movement. The blows were like shooting stars streaking across the night sky, fast and intense. Lifa watched in awe, wondering how someone could train to wield two swords with such speed and precision. Eugene tried his best to fight back, using quick shifts in his sword attacks to counter his opponent. But it wasn't working. Every time he tried to strike, the double parry blocked him. Eugene was getting pushed back, and he let out a mighty roar. Mera Hach! He stumbled backward, his feet scraping against the ground. One of Eugene's armor pieces suddenly glowed with a special power, shooting out a half-sphere of flames that forced Kirito to jump back. Kirito quickly readied his powerful demon sword and swung it forward with all his might. The crash was deafening. A loud gong echoed through the air. Kirito didn't show any fear. He charged forward, swinging his katana as fast as lightning. The blades clashed in a high-pitched shang. The metallic ring filled the air as the two fighters exchanged blows. Sparks flew through the air as two swords clashed. Eugene's katana hit Kirito's sword just in time, stopping him from using his special move, the ethereal shift. But Eugene's blow didn't completely miss him. That grazed Kirito's left shoulder as it whizzed by. Kirito let out a fierce battle cry, Rasa! His huge sword shot forward with incredible power. It struck with a loud thud, piercing the body of a salamander. The creature let out a pained guasa. What made Kirito's attack so deadly was its speed, and the fact that he and Eugene were moving in opposite directions. This created a massive impact that gave the strike enormous damage. Eugene's health bar suddenly dropped into the danger zone. But Kirito wasn't done yet. He quickly pulled back his big sword and swung it again in a super-fast katana move. This happened so fast that Eugene didn't even have time to get his footing back. The 4 hits created a cool square shape in the air, surrounding the salamander's bulky body. Eugene's eyes widened in shock as he felt himself getting cut. His upper body started sliding off from his right shoulder all the way to his left waist, without making a sound. The light from Kirito's sword faded away. Suddenly a huge guy was surrounded by end flames, and his avatar started burning up. Nobody moved a muscle. The sylphs, Kate Siths, and over 50 salamanders just stood there, like they were statues. It was as if they were so shocked that their souls had left their bodies. That's how amazing the battle they just saw was. Usually fights in LO are pretty messy. Players who fight up close swing their weapons wildly, and those who attack from far away cast spells without much thought or planning. But this battle was different. Most players weren't very good at defending themselves or dodging attacks, but during the final matches of a dueling tournament, you might see some really cool battles. What just happened between Kirito and Eugene was even better than that. They had an amazing fight with swords clashing, a fast-paced battle in mid-air, and powerful blows that shook the ground. Kirito's super speedy dual blades were crazy to watch. Sakuya was the first to speak up after the fight. "Wow, great job!" she exclaimed, clapping her hands loudly. "That was incredible. What an awesome battle." Elisha Rue agreed, and soon all 12 of them were cheering and applauding. The crowd went wild, clapping and cheering. Some people even whistled and shouted bravo. Lifa felt excited but also a little nervous. As she watched the salamanders, she thought they would be upset because their leader had just been beaten. But instead, the cheers started to spread to the salamander team too. They began to cheer and wave their lances in the air like flags. Lifa couldn't help but smile. It was a cool moment. Her enemies, the salamanders, were also players of the game Elo, just like her. The air was electric as Kirito and Eugene's epic duel came to an end. The crowd went wild, cheering and clapping like crazy. Leafa couldn't help but join in, swept up in the excitement of the moment. She felt a weird thrill run through her as she applauded along with everyone else. Kirito stood tall, a calm smile on his face as he basked in the attention. He slid his sword back into its spot on his back, and raised a hand to wave at the crowd. "Hi folks. Thanks," he called out, waving in all directions. Then he caught sight of Leafa's group and shouted over to them, still grinning from ear to ear. "Someone cast a resurrection spell." Sakuya stepped forward, her flowing outfit waving like a flag as she moved. She rose up to meet Eugene's remain light, and started chanting in a low voice. As she spoke, blue light began to pour from her hands, surrounding the bright red flame. The light swirled into a fancy magical symbol, and inside it the flame slowly transformed back into a person. With one last burst of light, the symbol vanished, leaving the person standing there. Kirito, Sakuya, and Eugene walked quietly down to the edge of the terrace. Everything was calm again. Eugene spoke up, his voice low. "You're an amazing player," he said. "I've never seen anyone as good as you." Kirito just smiled and said, "Thanks." Eugene sounded surprised. "I had no idea the Spriggans had someone like you on their team. I guess the world is a lot bigger than I thought." Then he asked, "So, do you believe me now?" But Eugene just didn't say anything. He narrowed his eyes and stayed silent for a moment. One of the guards standing near the terrace took a step forward. Eugene stopped in his tracks, his armor clanking loudly. He lifted the visor of his helmet, revealing his face. A man with a rough-looking face saluted him. "A word, Gene?" he asked. "What is it, Kagiman?" Eugene replied. Leafa's eyes widened as she heard the name. She remembered it from her battle on the underground lake. The surviving mage had mentioned it earlier. That meant this man was the leader of the salamanders who attacked her in the ancient forest just yesterday. It was during her first meeting with Kirito. Kagiman began to speak. "I'm sure you know my party got wiped out yesterday." Leafa held her breath and listened carefully. She realized he was talking about the same incident that had happened to her. "Yes," Eugene said. Kagiman continued. "It was that Spriggan who did it. And an Undine was with him too." Leafa's eyes went wide, as she stared at Kagiman in shock. Kirito's eyebrows flickered for a split second, but he quickly went back to his calm and collected self. Kagiman kept talking. "We got word from our source, Sec, that the mage team was after him too, but they didn't have much luck. The Sec probably stood for spy, or maybe it was short for a name like Sigurd." Eugene looked at Kagiman with a confused expression, clearly trying to piece together what was going on. Everyone around them probably had no idea what was going on, but Leafa was listening super closely. Eugene finally nodded and a small smile spread across his face. "I see," he said. "Let's just leave it at that then." He turned to Kirito and said, "Right now, neither I nor our leader wants to start any trouble with the Spriggans or Undines. I'll be back, and next time we meet, it won't be pretty," Eugene said with a grin. "I'm looking forward to it." Kirito replied calmly. Eugene cracked his knuckles against Kirito's fist, then turned around. With a burst of energy he spread his wings and jumped into the air. Kurijimin followed close behind, but not before he caught Leafa's eye, and gave her a silly wink and smile. Leafa thought everything was okay now. Like his debt had been paid off. A happy grin spread across her face and her right cheek even got a cute dimple. But she didn't let out the breath she'd been holding until the two men flew away. As the important guests watched, the salamanders quickly got back into their battle positions, and took off with a loud buzzing sound. Eugene led the way, and they all followed him into the sky. A huge group of black shapes dove into the clouds, got fuzzy, and then disappeared. The area was quiet again, so Kirito spoke up with a grin. "See, those salamanders aren't as bad as you thought." Leafa was shocked and didn't know what to say for a few seconds. Then she blurted out, "You're seriously crazy." Kirito just shrugged and said, "I get that a lot." Leafa giggled, and soon they were both laughing. Just then, Sakuya cleared her throat to remind them she was still there. "Excuse me," she said politely, "can someone please tell me what's going on?" The room got quiet again, and Leafa started explaining everything that had happened. She made it clear that some of what she was saying was just a guess, but she told them all about it anyway. Sakuya, Alicia, and the other important guests listened carefully, waiting for her to finish explaining. When she finally stopped talking, they all let out a deep breath at the same time. Sakuya murmured. I see, with her arms crossed and a slight raise of her eyebrows. Lately, I've noticed that Sigurd seems really impatient and grumpy. I wanted to rule in a fair way, by listening to ideas and working together, so I gave him a big role in my team. Now it looks like that was a mistake. Sakuya's expression showed she was thinking deeply about what had gone wrong. I know how tough it can be, someone said to Sakuya, trying to offer some support. Alicia Rue, who had been leading her own people for a pretty long time, turned to the others and said, "You're really well liked as a ruler." But then she asked, "What's got him so mad?" Lifa leaned in, curious about the answer. Sakuya gazed out at the horizon before speaking up. "I think he's angry because we gave the salamanders too much power," she said. There was a pause. "Sigurd is a guy who really wants to be in charge," Sakuya explained. Imagine a video game where one player has total control over others. This guy just couldn't handle the thought of salamanders finishing the main quest and ruling the skies of Alfheim, while he was stuck on the ground. But what's weird is that he started acting like a spy for the salamanders. So why would he do that? It all started with rumors about the new update 5.0. People are saying it will include a reincarnation system. This means that Mortimer probably planted an idea in his head. Imagine being offered a deal that sounds too good to be true. That's what happened when someone said, "Get rid of your leader, and I'll make you a salamander." But there's a catch, it takes a lot of special energy called Yrd to make it happen. And who knows if the person making the promise would actually keep their word. Lifa gazed out at the sky, which was turning golden, and the faint outline of the world tree in the distance. She felt torn. Her biggest dream was to be reborn as an elf, which would mean she could fly as free as she wanted, without any limits. She had joined Sigurd's group for a very important reason. This team was made up of the toughest sylphs around, and she wanted to be part of it. To help the government, she gave them almost all of her earnings, which were measured in something called Yrd. If she hadn't met Kirito and left the group, things might have turned out very differently. It's likely that Sigurd would have asked her to join a secret plan to reincarnate as a salamander. Kirito let out a sad sigh and said, "Halo is a pretty mean game. It really tests how greedy its players can be." He shook his head, thinking about the person who designed it. "I bet they're not a very nice person." Sakuya laughed and agreed with him. Lifa felt a little extra friendly, so she put her arm around Kirito's and leaned in close to him. Being near Kirito made her feel calm and steady again. "So what's the plan, Sakuya?" she asked. Sakuya's smile vanished, and she closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her green eyes sparkled with a sharp light. "Rue, you've been practicing your dark magic, right?" Alicia Rue's ears wiggled to say yes. "Use moonlight mirror on Sigurd," Sakuya said. "Okay, but it won't work for long in the daytime," Sakuya replied. "That's not a problem." Alicia's ears twitched again, and she stepped back, raising her hands. She began to chant in a high-pitched voice, saying words that sounded strange and mysterious. The air around them grew dark, but then a beam of moonlight broke through. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. The moonbeam gathered in front of Alicia, forming a pool of golden light. As they watched, the light took shape, becoming a perfect circle, a shimmering mirror that seemed to appear out of thin air.